Harlem Assemblyman Keith Wright joins us from New York City tonight to share his reaction to today's censure vote. Good evening, Assemblyman.
Good evening, Liz. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Well, you know, this actually kind of strikes me as a little anticlimactic and not terribly surprising, but you did see Congressman Rangel give a fairly rousing speech right at the end. His reaction was, yet again, "I haven't had a bad day since." That's the title of his book. Are you surprised at his spirit?
No, not at all. Congressman Rangel has been a very resilient, sober, a man of his convictions. Certainly, these proceedings have taken its toll, not only upon him, his family, but the community in and of itself. But you know what? The sun will come out tomorrow. The good part is that it's over. What I think that the committee really should have taken into account was that certainly that his constituents just, I guess, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, overwhelmingly elected him back to Congress.
Right.
And those are the people that really matter. So it's Congressman Rangel's last statements talking about he hasn't had a bad day. It's typical Congressman Rangel being optimistic, being upbeat, and really not wanting to put anyone, especially the Congress and especially his constituents and especially his family, in an awkward position.
It seems, though, Assemblyman, that he could have saved everyone a lot of grief had he been more apologetic up front. Now he is very apologetic, and even though his final words were a little bit, you know, sort of a little in your face, like, okay, fine, you did what you had to do, and I'm still here, and you're not getting rid of me, all of that. But in the beginning, it seemed like he was very, you know, reluctant to say he was sorry. Why didn't he just apologize?
Well, let me just say this. Congressman Rangel, hindsight is 20/20. When I guess these allegations first came to the forefront, I mean, there were no instances of moral turpitude. There was no criminal activity. Quite frankly, it really looked like it was something that was becoming very politicized, and certainly, as I said, after 2 years and after $2 million in legal fees, I think Congressman Rangel said, let's just get this over and done with.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. It was becoming politicized. What do you mean by that? Are you suggesting that it was drawn out in some way, on purpose?
Oh, sure. I mean, listen. You know, you can an investigation taking well over 2 years. I'm sure there were some, and you're talking about Congress, which is a very political body, and it was proven that there were various think tanks, conservative think tanks, that were drumming up the opposition research, if you will.
But wait, Assemblyman, I mean, the Democrats controlled the House, and they had the ability to hurry this along. I mean, I remember speaking to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi when she was in New York City a year ago, and she said, we're gonna have this moving right along in January. Then a year later, we're almost, you know.
Well, it got drawn out. And certainly, I mean, there are such things as very conservative Democrats some of whom probably did not get reelected in their districts, but who probably think of running again. And they, you know, I think about 100 Democrats, conservative Democrats, if you will, voted against or voted for the censure. I'm sorry.
So then when you say that you think it was politicized, you thought that it was drawn out on purpose to use Charlie Rangel as some kind of symbol, and that because of that, that's what cost the Democrats their control of the House?
Well, I don't think this in and of itself cost the Democrats control of the House, but I think that Congressman Rangel was used as a symbol of some sort in terms, because let's face it, as chairperson of the House Ways and Means Committee, ostensibly the most powerful committee in Congress, whoever holds the mantle is going to be subject to all sorts of scrutiny.
So were you surprised? I mean, Pete King, who is a Republican from Long Island. Now, we should say that being a Republican in New York, in some cases, particularly down in near the New York City areas, is not like being a Republican in, say, I don't know, the Deep South or perhaps more conservative areas. However, he is a Republican, and he got up and said, I am not going to vote for censure, and he urged all of his colleagues to vote for the reprimand amendment. Now, that didn't happen, but were you surprised by that?
No, I was not surprised. Peter King has been a longstanding member of Congress, and he certainly has, I commend him actually for looking at the situation on the merits of the allegations, and he came to a conclusion. Was I surprised? Well, I would say not really, knowing Peter King the way that I know him. He's a very fair-minded legislator, and I do believe that he and Congressman Rangel have a long history of fighting in the trenches for the good of the people of New York State.
Do you think that there could be repercussions for him eventually, or is this going to be viewed as, okay, he's from New York, this was a New York sort of vote? Because they're actually the entire New York City delegation, with the exception of Mike McMahon, who's a Democrat, but he was defeated by a Republican. He's a Staten Island guy. They voted in favor of the reprimand amendment, and so is that going to be viewed just like he's a hometown guy, or will there be political repercussions for that?
I don't think there will be, nor do I think that there should be any repercussions to Peter King for voting against the censure. Peter King has been a very effective representative for his district out in Long Island. He's been known to be a very independent-minded legislator, but above and beyond everything else, he represents the needs of his district very well, and he represents them well.
Okay, so what happens now? I mean, Charlie Rangel, pinnacle of his career, has lost Ways and Means, has been censured, is no longer in the majority. You have told me on this show in previous interviews that you believe he is not going to step down, that he will serve out the next 2 years. Will he, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's in his 80s. Will he run again?
Well, listen, any legislator, I don't care how old you are, whether you're 30 years old or 80 years old, that's a determination that that person has to make.
Well, but you've spoken to him. I mean, you've been
I have spoken to him.
You've been spoken of as a potential successor to him, so I'm sure that, you've had this conversation.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, but any legislator, any congressperson has to make up their own minds when the next election day starts to loom. They have to make up their mind whether or not they can be effective, whether or not they have the fire in the belly, and whether or not they want to run again. That's a question that Congressman Rangel has to decide for himself if and when that time comes. Quite frankly, I'm proud to say that he is still my congressperson. I'm proud to say that I continue to look forward to working with him, and I'm proud to say that the people of Harlem elected him overwhelmingly. If and when the time comes that he chooses to run or not to run, that's for him to decide, and that's the question that he has to decide in and of himself. In
terms of legacy, now he has got obviously a storied career. He mentioned today yet again his Korean War service. He mentioned his decades-long career in public service. This, of course, is going to be a blot at the end of his career when he should have been at the pinnacle. But do you really believe that it might be possible that when people look at his legacy and weigh it out, that censure won't outweigh everything else?
Oh, absolutely. Censure will, as far as I'm concerned, won't even be thought of in many ways but in terms of the good work and the hard work that he has put in as far as being a public servant for well over 40 years. You have to remember that he not only has been a congressman for 40 years, he served in the New York State legislature, and even before that he was a federal prosecutor. So this man is a consummate public service. This censure today, I think everyone, including Congressman Rangel himself, is glad that it's over. Now let's get on with the work at hand.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us from New York City, Assemblyman Keith Wright. It's good to see you.
Thank you.